like a whole 30 minutes.
It was 2:46 p.m. when the ground began to shake. For residents of Anagawa, Japan, earthquakes were nothing new, but this one was different. It carried with it a violence that none of the locals had ever felt before, and by the time the shaking had stopped, everyone in the city seemed to be left in a momentary state of shock. This was especially true for the nearly 160 Chinese workers and students that had recently moved to the area, with most having never experienced any earthquake, let alone one of this magnitude. Of these workers were a tight-knit group of 20 women, who had recently been hired as trainees at a company called Sato Susan, a company that sold fresh seafood. And having been at work at the time of the quake, they frantically ran out of the building and stood in the street desperately trying to figure out what to do next, unaware of the fact that the real horrors were still yet to come. In Japan, it's not just the earthquakes you have to worry about, but the tsunamis that often follow. And usually, the bigger the earthquake, the bigger the wave. And given that Anagawa was right on the sea, and Sato Susan was directly on the shoreline, these women were now standing directly in the path of an impending disaster. Thankfully, their boss, Mitsudo Sato, was well aware of what was to come, and quickly he yelled to the women to seek higher ground. But given their unfamiliarity with the area, Sato knew that he would have to be the one to lead them there. The group readily listened, and they quickly followed Sato as he led them up a set of stairs on a nearby hill, where they eventually reached a shrine that overlooked Anagawa and the sea. It was the highest point in the area, and should keep them safe from what would likely be a massive influx of water. And sure enough, as they neared the top, Sato's fears were already coming true. As the sea had drastically retreated, it was now beginning to push forward, and things were only going to get worse from here. But despite understanding this, it wasn't a deterrent for Sato, as once he deemed the altitude safe enough for this group of women, he then turned around and began to walk back down the hill towards the slowly flooding city. The girls yelled at him asking where he was going, which is when he revealed that down below in his home in Anagawa were his wife and his daughter, who were now directly in the path of this unfolding disaster, and he was going to save them. The girl screamed out to him, begging him not to go, as things had already become incredibly dangerous, but he didn't so much as turn his head as he stepped down onto the street and disappeared from their view. And it was at this time that one of those girls standing high atop the hill began to record. All my life, family has been super important to me. I love my family, but I also realize I don't know much about them, at least outside of my immediate family members, and specifically my grandfather, who I never got the chance to meet. And when thinking about this the other day, I went down a rabbit hole of trying to find out more information about my ancestors. And in doing so, I ended up partnering with MyHeritage, the #1 family history service and the sponsor of today's video. With MyHeritage, you
saved us.
The footage shows that the shoreline was no more, as the water had inundated the entire area as it slowly crept its way deeper and deeper into the city streets. The women were understandably in a panic, trying to make sense of this ordeal that they were now given a front row seat to. And as they record, we can hear them desperately calling out for Sato, but at no point do we see him. We just know that he's down there, somewhere. And as the desperation in their pleas increases, so too does the fury of the water.
That water is gushing and
they could only watch as Anagawa as they knew it was completely eviscerated. And by this point, they realized that there was now essentially no hope for Sato. It was at this time that the women realized that despite already being at a considerable height, it still might not be enough, and so they ran even higher up the hill, desperately trying to get out of the path of this water. And as they did so, they noticed something down below. Standing on a rooftop in the middle of this massive tsunami was Mitsudo Sato. The building that he stood on was once a full 2 stories off the ground, but was now just a few inches above the surface of the water. The women again call out to him, this time even more frantically, but at this point, it was no use. And when the camera is taken off Sato for just a split second, we can hear just from the women's reaction the exact moment that he swept away. The recording stops shortly after and restarts minutes later, revealing that the streets where the women had been standing just moments before were now fully underwater, and the buildings that once stood around them were now reduced to nothingness. In front of them was a sea of death, and had Mitsudo Sato not led them up that hill, then all of these women would have certainly been a part of it.
City impossible. That whole city is underwater.
The date was March 11th, 2011, a day where Japan had been hit by its most devastating earthquake ever, with it ringing in at a magnitude 9.0, which in turn caused the nation's worst ever tsunami, as that day, 19,759 people would lose their lives, with Mitsudo Sato being one of them. But against all odds, his wife and daughter were not part of that death toll, as it's been reported that they were later found alive and unharmed. The devastation that occurred that day is incomprehensible, and all the footage of this disaster could warrant a place in this video, especially the footage of Anagawa, as you can see what it looked like before, during, and after. But what I found so interesting about this was all throughout this disaster were stories like Sato's, a man who risked his life to save 20 women that he hardly knew, and a man who gave his life trying to save his family, walking directly into the path of the worst natural disaster in modern Japanese history, all in an attempt to save the ones that he loved. And I honestly find it quite beautiful that afterwards, these women adamantly shared his story and made sure that the world forever remembered Mitsudo Sato as the hero that he was. And of those 160 Chinese migrants who worked in the area, it was later reported that not a single one of them perished, which speaks volumes about the people of Anagawa, who so readily put others' lives before their own.
Fire marshal is investigating a blaze in Georgetown. 2 people found dead inside the home, and so far it's not known how the fire started.
It was just past 5:30 a.m. on the 17th of February 2021 when residents of a small neighborhood in Georgetown, Ontario were woken by the sound of sirens blaring. One man frantically grabbed his cell phone and rushed outside to record the unfolding scene, where he was met with a horrific sight. His neighbor's home was fully engulfed in flames. It must have happened quickly, as by the time rescue workers even arrived on the scene, there was already little hope of saving the house, or any of its occupants. It would take hours before that blaze was finally quelled, revealing the charred devastation inside, as firefighters would find the remains of 56-year-old Christina Rirak and 59-year-old Andrew Rirak within the home's garage. The cause of this fire was initially unknown, but quickly the situation was deemed suspicious when experts determined that the fire had started as a result of some sort of explosion that had happened within the garage where the couple's bodies were found. This was later confirmed by security footage obtained from a neighbor who lived across the street, capturing the moments when it suddenly ignited around 5:27 a.m. There was clearly something off with this case, and things only became more sinister following the autopsies of Andrew and Christina, which revealed that they hadn't actually died in that fire, and instead, both of them had been stabbed to death.
What?
with Andrew also being badly beaten. This fire wasn't started to kill them, it was started to cover up their murder. And it did a good job of it too, as the scene was now left completely destroyed, with very little evidence being left behind. But there was something else investigators thought to check. That's security footage. The camera had been facing the garage where all of this carnage seemed to have happened, and so they thought maybe if they looked back far enough, it could at the very least show what had led up to this brutal attack. And so they rewound that footage, going back hours and hours, during all of which the garage had remained perfectly still, until they got all the way back to 6:42 of the day prior, February 16th. The film showed the moments that the couple had arrived home together inside of Christina's car, which Andrew had been driving that night, as he pulled uneventfully into the garage.
Something right there.
This was the last time this couple was seen alive on camera, which on its own is disturbing enough. But as it turns out, there was something far more unsettling about this footage, as it revealed the fact that Christina and Andrew weren't alone.
It's like blending in with the darkness, which you see his foot step out in the snow.
The footage showed a tall figure, its features completely shrouded in darkness, almost as if it were a shadow, with this figure lying in wait out of sight on the side of the house, until right after Andrew pulls the car into the garage, when this person slips in behind them. It's impossible to say for sure if the couple noticed this person or not, but it appears that they likely didn't, as they both start to exit the vehicle, to which the figure then ducks down in an attempt to avoid detection. Until the garage door begins to slowly close. Neither Christina or Andrew would make it out of that garage alive, as just seconds after this footage, they both would be brutally murdered by this unidentified person. The footage is terrifying and speaks to that innate fear in most of us, the fear of being followed, of being watched, and attacked in the moments where we least expect it. It's paranoia-inducing, and made even more off-putting by the fact that this clearly seemed to be premeditated. Whoever this was knew their schedule and had been waiting for them to arrive home, in a place where they knew they wouldn't be seen. But by this point, their motivation was as unknown as their identity. Following the discovery of this footage, bits and pieces were released to the press in order to get the public's help in identifying this unknown assailant. It represented a rare instance of a killer being clearly caught on camera right before committing a crime, but that's also what made this case so frustrating, as despite the video capturing this person, none of their features were discernible at all.
Nothing.
Unsurprisingly, the footage didn't bring in any relevant leads, but it at the very least showed investigators that whoever this person was knew the couple, due to its obvious premeditation. Though when looking into both Andrew and Christina, it was clear that neither of them really had any enemies in their life, with the exception of one. Harrison Brown was a 27-year-old employee at a company called Rogue Transportations, of which Christina happened to be the vice president of operations, and during his time there, Harrison was known to be abrasive and combative, with Christina often having to be the one to reprimand him, leading to Harrison resenting her. It isn't clear how police were tipped off about this strained working relationship, but they had somehow grown suspicious enough of Harrison to pay his home a visit, and what they found inside showed that this resentment he had towards Christina had actually morphed into a twisted obsession. Inside, police found satellite images of the Rear-X home, along with the software on the man's computer and cell phone that showed that on the 12th of February, he had secretly attached a tracking device to Christina's car, and he had been tracking her movements for days, which is precisely how he knew when she would be arriving home. And as if this revelation wasn't damning enough, they would also find a broken knife in his garage that contained trace amounts of Christina's blood. It was obvious what Harrison had done, and when confronted with this evidence, there was nothing more he could say other than the truth. So he admitted he had grown a hatred for Christina because of the way that she had treated him at work, and he decided that he needed to get his revenge. That's when he purchased this tracking device and began obsessing over her movements, studying them before finding the perfect time and place to strike. And on February 16th, he waited outside the Rear-X home and snuck into their garage before attacking and killing them both. After the assault, Harrison would leave the home, where he began to grow paranoid about being caught, and so he returned to the house the very next morning to start that fire, with the hopes being that the blaze would cover up his tracks. Though thankfully, this didn't work, and after pleading guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson, Harrison Brown would be sentenced to life in prison.
Binge.
All 20, roll over TC. I've got an unresponsive female. I got a male in the car, refusing to get out.
It's the eve of Thanksgiving, 2015. Police officer Patrick Feaster sits in his cruiser parked alongside the road in the town of Paradise, California, waiting for his first action of this uncharacteristically quiet night. His car was facing the direction of a well-known local cantina, which patrons were known to drive away from under the influence. And sure enough, as the clock approached midnight, the calmness around Feaster would be shattered by the sight of a car speeding out of the restaurant's parking lot. The car went unseen by Feaster's dashcam, but not by Feaster himself, as he took off, doing his best to catch up with the car that was now speeding down the road, and within a few seconds, he does. As the car slowly comes into frame for the first time, inside that vehicle was 26-year-old Andrew Thomas and his ex-wife, 23-year-old Darian Aaron. Andrew had been drinking heavily that night and was well over the legal limit, with his driving showing as much as he failed to pull over once Feaster approached him, resulting in a police chase that would only end up lasting just a few seconds.
All 20, roll over TC. Pearson, just east of Black Olive.
Jesus. Thought he was getting away.
As Andrew would drive his car directly into a median, causing the SUV to flip over violently before coming to a halt on its side. In that instant, Darian was ejected from the vehicle, being thrown straight through the windshield and landing onto the asphalt, where, despite still being alive, her injuries were likely unsurvivable. But Andrew, on the other hand, was still inside the vehicle, and he seemed to have been left relatively unharmed. As perhaps being boosted by adrenaline, he quickly tried to crawl his way out of the car in a desperate attempt to check on Darian, with Officer Feaster's dashcam capturing the entire ordeal. Though just as Andrew attempted to do so, we see Feaster step into the frame, where he suddenly draws his gun and, without saying a single word, fires 2 shots at Andrew, with one of the bullets appearing to strike him, causing his body to go limp as he falls back into the car. It happened in a literal instant, so fast that it's clear Feaster had most likely accidentally discharged his weapon, as there was no attempt at communication before the shot was fired, with Andrew clearly posing no risk to him, as both of his hands were being used to hoist himself up. From the footage, this all seems to be a horrible accident, and one that Feaster seemed to recognize right away, as he rushed up to the car, pointing his flashlight at the man that he had just shot, staring at him for over 10 seconds, trying to make sense of what he had just done, before he finally snaps out of it and uses his radio to call for backup. Though this is when this already dark video starts to become much more disturbing.
I've got an unresponsive female. I got a male in the car, refusing to get out.
When Feaster makes this call, he never mentions the shooting, and instead he states that the driver was refusing to get out of the vehicle. This is then followed by Feaster walking away from the man and pointing his flashlight to the ground, almost as if he was looking for something.
No shot he's looking for shell casings. If he is, he's brain dead.
With some theorizing that he was looking for his shell casings. Though right then, another officer arrives on the scene and begins to survey the wreckage.
Just her?
No, there's a male in the car refusing to get out.
Where, again, Feaster says that Andrew was refusing to get out of the car, making no mention of the fact that he had just shot him. It's clear at this point what Feaster was trying to do. He was trying to cover up his accident, but this suddenly became more difficult when Andrew started to speak.
Okay, we got one. He's refusing to get out. Get out of the car, sir. Not shot, sir. Get out of the car.
Andrew Thomas was still alive, and had muttered to Feaster that he had been shot. But even to his face, Feaster denies it.
You have
Shortly
not
after,
been
Andrew
shot.
then tries to tell the other cop what had happened.
Sir, please come out of the car. This car is still on, and I don't want you to get hurt. What do you mean you got shot?
Yeah, I was right there. I saw it.
Did you get shot at the cantina? Who shot you? The cop did not shoot you.
But understandably, this other cop wasn't believing him, as surely Feaster would have said something at this point. And so, the minutes start to pass. And after 5 full minutes, Feaster continues processing the scene like nothing had happened, with the other officer being left to theorize that Andrew must have been seriously injured and was likely in a state of shock, which is why he was making all of these strange claims about being shot.
He may be hurt in there. Yeah, I know he is. He's in shock at the very least.
From here, the footage cuts, and we're only left with the audio from that same officer's body cam, as he attempts to get more information from Andrew.
Sir, I need you to talk to me so I know you're okay. Sir, take a look at me. Did you bump your head?
But by this point, he had gone completely silent.
I don't know if he's serious or not.
10 minutes later, the footage then cuts back on, this time to another officer's body cam, which shows that an ambulance had now finally arrived on the scene, with medics first directing their attention to Darian, who was in the worst shape, as she would tragically be pronounced dead shortly after. But despite all of these first responders on the scene, none of them had any idea that the man inside that vehicle had just been shot, and shot by one of their colleagues. And in these moments, Andrew was slowly losing his life as each minute passed. It would take 11 full minutes before Feaster finally confessed.
Sir, you hold this scene, Manny, with me. We're going over to the cantina to find out if this guy...
I think I shot him. I wasn't even pointing at him. The gun could go off.
Saying that he might have shot the man, but he wasn't sure. And immediately after saying this,
Oh my God, are you serious?
No,
the recording is stopped, and the footage comes to an end.
Oh my god.
Sure enough, in that moment, Officer Patrick Feaster had in fact shot Andrew Thomas, with a bullet striking him directly in the neck. And the reason why he wasn't getting out of his vehicle was because that gunshot had left him fully paralyzed from the neck down. His condition was awful, and made worse by the length of time that it took for him to receive proper treatment. And despite fighting for weeks, Andrew Thomas would lose his life less than 1 month later, due to that gunshot wound. Afterwards, Feaster admitted that he did fire his gun, but claimed that in the moment he wasn't actually sure if he had hit Andrew. But many found this hard to believe, as his gun clearly goes off while he's pointing it at Andrew, and he clearly gets a good view of him immediately after the fact. Not to mention the fact that Andrew literally told him over and over again that he was shot. But for many, by far the most incriminating moment was when Feaster appeared to be looking for his shell casings. And because of his actions, Officer Patrick Feaster would be found guilty of manslaughter and receive a prison sentence of 180 days. A decision that was heavily contested but ultimately upheld.
Qualified immunity.
And while no one is defending Andrew Thomas's decision to drink and drive that night, Feaster's use of deadly force and his blatant attempt at covering it up make this footage harrowing nonetheless.
It is brain dead that he's looking for shell casings.
I do this for real, bro. I don't got no problem with giving back, man. I'm the only one out here with a show that's
absolutely brain dead.
And I got proof to show it.
It's May 2013. 23-year-old Quamaine Wilson arrives at his local bank in Chicago, Illinois to deposit $20,000 cash, which he planned on giving out to groups of his most adoring fans.
Man, about to go get this $1,000 out for the fans, man. Really, I'm gonna take out $20,000, man. Just to show people, you feel me? I'm on a whole different level with this.
To this point, Quamaine had carved out a respectable following on his YouTube channel, where he acted in a series called The Nick Story.
One more word out your mouth, and that's your last. That's your life. I'm gonna take it myself and put it in my graveyard with the rest of them.
Along with posting music he made under the name Young QC.
Out her song, but not until she's. I know she will. I'm gonna get you.
Based on his viewership alone, his success was apparent, and he wasn't shy about showing off the wealth that he claimed to have accrued as a result of it, posting photos and videos of himself flaunting large amounts of cash across his social media pages. But this video was by far his most boastful yet, as he would take that $20,000 and throw it into the air for all of his fans to fight over. With Quamain clearly relishing in the opportunity to show off his riches, despite the fact that behind the scenes, things weren't quite as they seemed. The truth was, Quamain had actually earned very little from his channel despite its viewership, with this being on account of his videos containing copywritten music and the fact that he only had a dozen or so uploads. In fact, his social media flexing had started well before he even made his first video, as in reality, all of this money was coming straight from his mother, Yolanda Holmes. Having started a successful business in Chicago, Yolanda made a great living for herself and Quamain. And being her only son, Quamain was given just about anything he could have asked for. She would buy him designer clothes, jewelry, and even the Mustang seen in this video. But for Quamain, it never seemed to be enough. He wanted to achieve a life of fame and riches, and he used his mother's finances to sell the illusion that he already had, asking her again and again to purchase him things that could help him sell this dream, until one day, it all came crashing down, when Yolanda would tragically lose her life. Just like that, Quamain's entire support system had fallen out beneath his feet, leaving him without his mother and without the provider who was funding his entire life. But strangely, this didn't seem to stop his lavish online presence. In fact, his spending only seemed to increase after this, as this footage of him giving away money to fans actually took place after the death of his mother, which became extremely off-putting for law enforcement, as Yolanda hadn't simply passed away, and instead, she had been brutally murdered.
What?
Quamain had learned something shortly before Yolanda's passing, that not only were his mother's savings entirely willed to him, but she had also taken out 2 life insurance policies, in which he was the sole beneficiary. And despite Yolanda giving him anything that he could have asked for, it seemed that by this point, Quamain had simply grown tired of having to ask. And so, on September 2nd, 2012, he would offer his friend Eugene Spencer $3,500 to kill his own mother. Eugene accepted the offer, and that night he would travel to the apartment of Yolanda Holmes late at night, where he entered her room and shot her multiple times as she slept. At the time, her boyfriend had been sleeping next to her, and despite jumping up and doing his best to fight off the attacker, Eugene would eventually beat him unconscious before fleeing the scene. Eugene would call Quamain immediately after the attack to tell him that the job was done, but rather than feeling any sort of guilt, Quamain instead had no emotion, and he simply stated, "Make sure the bitch is dead." And so Eugene went back up to that unit, this time brandishing a knife, and repeatedly stabbed Yolanda until he was absolutely certain she was gone.
Bro, hello?
And with that, Quamain Holmes was a rich man, and it only cost him the life of his own mother. For a moment, the crime had worked perfectly. The police were left with no concrete leads as to who might have killed Yolanda, and the public largely believed that it was her boyfriend, whom Eugene had knocked unconscious. But no one even thought to look at Quamain. And recognizing that he was in the clear, his behavior grew brazen almost immediately.
Quamain Wilson lost his mother to gun violence on November 14th.
My mother, she was a neighborhood woman. A guy entered her home, and murdered her, just to steal.
As he went on TV to talk about his mother's murder, where he peddled the theory to the public that this was some sort of botched robbery, all the while he showed no emotion. He wouldn't even wait a full week before depositing the money, as he took out $90,000 within just the first few days, and immediately began showing it off to his followers. And in this footage where he gave away that $20,000, throwing it into the air as if it meant nothing to him, every cent of that had come from the death of his own mother, a death in which he was entirely responsible for. It would take over a full year for Quamain and Eugene to be caught, with police largely being tipped off by his online antics. And in the end, Eugene was given a 100-year prison sentence, while Quamain received 99 years. With his legacy now permanently defined by his creation of one of YouTube's darkest videos.
I have trust issues now. I have trust issues.
I want to give one last thank you to this video sponsor, MyHeritage. Use my link down below to get your first 14 days completely free, or scan the QR code and start uncovering your story.
New fear unlocked. Never let people know you're rich. Jesus. Don't associate with crazy people. Is what that video taught me.